update. The presentation this afternoon will be specific to the residential and non-residential programs. So for non-residential, that's everything in the Con Ed service territory, and for Upstate, that's 750 kW and down. Before we get started, first I'll introduce myself. This is Max Joel. I'm the program manager for New York Sun. I'll make a few housekeeping notes. First, we will be only taking questions via the Q&A function because we have so many people on this webinar. So as you have questions as we go, please enter them into that Q&A function in the WebEx. We'll be pulling those together, and at the end of the presentation, we'll take a pause, consolidate them, and then go through and answer them. The other note is that this presentation is being recorded and will be posted with closed captions online. With that, I'll say welcome once again, and we can begin. Next slide, please. Slide 2, please. Okay, so today I'll be giving a brief introduction, then we'll be talking about the additional residential capacity, a brief update on Green Jobs, Green New York financing, another brief update on the Long Island Residential Energy Storage Program. Then for non-residential upstate projects specifically, we'll be touching on the new community adder, have a brief update on the Brownfield and landfill adder, and then finally, we'll have a longer section on the low to moderate income residential and affordable housing adder updates. We will be focusing throughout the presentation on updates and changes to the program, but there should be a lot of background information as well. Next slide, please. And the next one. So the most important update is that New York Sun has been extended to 2025 with a new target of 6 gigawatts of distributed solar installed statewide. That is, of course, an expansion from 3 gigawatts by 2023. This was mandated by the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act of 2019, and just last month, the Public Service Commission approved an order that gave New York Sun an additional $573 million budget to accomplish this expanded goal. So all the accompanying changes have been made to our program operating plan, our program manuals, and the dashboard, the live dashboards that we all use to keep track of the program. Those are all online. Links have been sent out via email, but they are also in this presentation. Next slide, please. So one thing I'd like to focus on for just a moment within the expanded 6 gigawatt program is the solar energy equity framework. This is something that we proposed in response to the mandate in the CLCPA that 40% of the benefits of clean energy investments go to disadvantaged communities. So there's a dedicated $135 million in funding now available to New York Sun, and we will be leveraging that. That will be primarily adder incentives, so we will be leveraging that with no less than $65 million in base incentives for a total investment of at least $200 million over the remainder of the program. And so those are for programs for LMI households, affordable housing, environmental justice communities, and disadvantaged communities. Several important updates to the existing LMI adders for residential projects and multifamily affordable housing projects have been made already. My colleague Chris Rogers will be going through those in detail later in the presentation. And there are new programs in development with the stakeholder process to start shortly. I won't be going into additional detail here, but there are summaries of those expected new strategies in the order and the program operating manual, or operating plan rather. Next slide, please. Slide 6, please. So before we get into the specific program updates, I did want to stop and acknowledge the impact of COVID-19 on all of us, and as well as especially this part of the solar sector. Um, Based on our own numbers and a survey that NYSERDA conducted, there have been a really devastating job losses in this sector, again, really focused on residential solar. As many of you know, we've taken steps within the program to address this as best we could with extended deadlines and partial payments on approved incentives. And many of the residential contractors on this call made significant use of the 0% Green Jobs, Green New York loan, which is now no longer available. All the available funds were used, but we saw a really great uptake by solar contractors for that program. There is much more detail in the COVID-19 impact report that NYSERDA filed on June 15th, and that's available through the Public Service Commission website. And with that, next slide, please. And I will turn it over to my colleague, Luke Forster.
Hi, this is Luke Forster. I'm going to speak about a few different things, but first is an update to the Upstate residential megawatt block capacity. So this slide shows what's hopefully a familiar image to most of you. This is the block structure for the Upstate residential market. As you'll see, we're on block number 8. The incentive there is 35 cents per watt. We have a good bit of capacity left in that. If we look at the current subscription rate over the past few years, the remaining capacity should be enough to last us for about 12 or so months. Block 9 beyond that is the last block in the original design, and that was originally scheduled to be 20 cents per watt. And at the bottom of the page, you'll see we have a link to that dashboard. This is just here to give you a little bit of context about where we currently are. And let's move on to the next slide, please. So as part of the program expansion, we received about $48 million for Upstate residential incentives. And that will support at least 100 megawatts of new projects in the Upstate residential sector. Before I go any further, I just want to give a little bit more context here. So as you're aware, we currently have net metering for residential projects in New York State. That is scheduled to last until the end of 2020. The Public Service Commission and the Department of Public Service have not yet indicated what will be coming, replacing that net metering. There's been a proceeding that's been going on for, I think, a little over 2 years now, but we don't yet have an official order indicating what will replace net metering as we know it. With that in mind, we're not yet going to commit to a new block design with that additional $48 million. We're going to take a look and see exactly when the post-net metering rate design is going into effect, and we're going to take a very hard look at the impact that rate design has on project economics. And we'll use that knowledge to update, possibly bolster and possibly increase the size of the existing block structure. It is not our intention to drop from 35 cents to 20 cents as we're stepping away from net metering. So exactly how those changes will unfold with that $48 million is to be determined. I know a lot of you are hoping to see some hard, firm numbers here, but we're going to pivot. We will consult the trade groups and stakeholders before going live with any new block design, but we just frankly need to wait and see what the impacts are of that rate design before locking in those numbers. That being said, that's all for the Upstate market. We're not making any changes to Con Ed or Long Island residential blocks at this time. As you're aware, the Long Island residential block closed a few years ago, and the Con Ed residential market is currently on its last block, and it's moving along at a very, very fast clip. and it's been accelerating over the past few years. So let's move on to the next slide, please. Here's a quick update on Green Jobs, Green New York. I'll speak a little bit about recent history and a little bit about some positive changes coming up. As Max indicated, we recently had a short-term offering where there was 0% financing, Green Jobs, Green New York. There was an initially published budget of $20 million available. We actually had over $30 million of loans come through. That offering actually closed this past Monday, June 15th. So now we're back to the baseline interest rates, 3.5% for households that are at 100%, 120% or less of the area median income, and 7% for households that are higher than that AMI cutoff. We do have a few changes to the Green Jobs, Green New York pro forma. That'll be going live on July 1st. And these are, in my opinion, positive changes that will make it easier for a project to qualify for Green Jobs, Green New York and a larger loan. Two changes. The first is that the user can now enter the value of the project's federal and state tax credits, as well as the New York City property tax abatement in that calculation. So you're not finding the cost effectiveness against the whole project cost. You're just finding the cost effectiveness versus the after tax credit project cost. Additionally, there was a savings to investment ratio, SIR, requirement of 1.0 in the calculator. That is being reduced to 0.8 to better align with the rest of NYSERDA's programs, which have had that 0.8. Those changes are going live on July 1st. We're just doing some final testing and some final coordination on the pro forma, and that will be posted soon. Let's move on, please. Okay, we have an incentive program available for residential energy storage projects that are coupled with PV in Long Island. This project has been open since last summer, about a year. We've seen some pretty good uptake, about 160 applications and around 66 completed projects so far. About 30% of the initial budget has been allocated to projects. That program is still open. We had a previous requirement where the incentive was only available to new PV plus storage projects. We've made a change, so now you can take that incentive if you have an existing PV project and you want to go back and add storage onto that. And again, the incentive is for storage. We do not have a base incentive for PV in Long Island residential. But this is a positive change, and we look forward to seeing more projects come in because of it. Let's move on, please. So as you're aware, community solar has had a very strong uptake in New York State over the past few years. And a large part of that has been driven by an incentive called the community credit. And before that, we had the market transition credit. The community credit and the MTC were an incentive that was managed by the utilities and sort of baked into the value stack as an element. That community credit has been fully used up for most of the state, most importantly, National Grid and NYSEG. As part of the New York Sun program expansion, we received a budget of $111 million to implement what we're calling a community adder. This is going to be an additional incentive, dollar per watt upfront incentive, paid for community solar projects. I say community solar because it's for PV projects only, whereas the MTC and the community credit were open to other technologies, including fuel cells, small wind, and small hydro. The community adder is available for solar plus storage projects. So this is being administered by NYSERDA, and we're releasing 2 blocks initially. The first is going to be for 250 megawatts at 22 cents per watt, and a second block at 200 megawatts at 18 cents per watt. Please note that these are DC megawatt blocks, whereas the community credit and the MTC, which were managed by the utilities, were in megawatts AC. So we've got an AC versus DC issue that you should be aware of. The incentive will be paid out according to base incentive. So if you're in the non-residential program, 100% of the base New York Sun incentive is paid out at PTO. The community adder is going to work the same way. You'll receive a single award letter from NYSERDA showing the base incentive and the community adder, and both the base incentive and the community adder are being paid out 100% at PTO. These are the rules for the non-residential program. For the commercial industrial program, it's according to the C&I payment schedule. I want to point out that these blocks are shared between the New York Sun non-residential and the commercial industrial programs. So out of that 250 megawatts, we expect most of that will go to large megawatt scale commercial industrial programs, commercial industrial projects, but those blocks are open to non-residential projects as well. We have a new dashboard. It's already live. I'll show you a screenshot of that in just a moment. You may be aware that we have already had a community adder for Orange and Rockland and Central Hudson. That program is still live. Those blocks are still open. The only change there is we've added another 30 megawatts DC to the Central Hudson block. I know I gave you a lot of information. We will have time to address questions on this topic and all the other topics at the end. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So the idea is that the community adder is going to be available to projects that did not receive the community credit. A project cannot receive both community credit and community adder. Right now, National Grid and NYSEG are sort of keeping a large wait list of projects in case a little bit more capacity does open up for their community credit. Projects will reserve or lock in their community adder by submitting a full project application to New York Sun. So in other words, you will need to meet all the milestones of the New York Sun Incentive Program before you can lock in the community adder. By contrast, the MTC and the community credit, you lock that in with the utility when you made your 25% utility upgrade payment, or if no payment was required, when you had that fully executed interconnection agreement. This is what I'm going to talk about next is sort of a fringe case, which may not apply to many projects in the non-residential program. If you've already submitted a CDG project for National Grid or NYSEG, and you're not getting the community credits, please let us know and we can allocate the community adder to that project. If a project receives the community adder and later becomes eligible for the community credit through the utility, you can go ahead and take that utility community credit, which is probably a little bit richer, but you would no longer get the community adder from New York Sun. That was a mouthful, so I'll say it a different way. You can receive the community adder, but if you get a chance to upgrade to the community credit, that's great. You can take that upgrade with the utility, but we will not pay you the community adder on top of that. And just a reminder, these blocks are shared between the non-residential and the commercial industrial programs. Let's move on, please. And here's just a screenshot of the new dashboard we put together. You'll recall that we used to have a chart on the Bailey Stack page for the Central Hudson and the Orange and Rockland community adders. We made something that's now more real-time updating. It's going to be located on the same section of the website as the megawatt block dashboards. So on the left-hand side, there will just be a link that says community adder, and you can click on it. It'll take you here. There are going to be they're already live, so there are 3 dashboards, one for National Grid, NYSEG, RG&E, one for Central Hudson, and one for Orange and Rockland. One little caveat here, Rochester Gas and Electric has about 12 megawatts left in their community credit. I expect that will soon be closed. Once that's used up, RG&E will be able to take the community adder. We just took the liberty of putting RG&E on this dashboard because we know it will soon be eligible. And we've got a link at the bottom of this page that will take you to this dashboard. As a reminder, we are recording this presentation and the slides will be made available afterwards, including all the hyperlinks. Let's move on, please. Now I'm going to pass the mic to Candace Rossi, who will speak a little bit about the Brownfield and landfill adder. Thank you.
Thanks, Luke. So my name is Candace Rossi. I'm a project manager on the New York Sun team. And as Luke said, I'm going to speak briefly on the Brownfield landfill adder updates. There have been some notable changes in this adder. Specifically, the adder is increasing from 10 cents per watt to 15 cents per watt. Additionally, the eligibility criteria has also changed. The previous rules allowed for the project sites where development was deterred due to contaminants, but were not part of any DEC or EPA database to be eligible for the adder. Moving forward, only projects that are listed as brownfields or landfills by either the DEC or EPA will be eligible. Lastly, the eligibility form that was previously being used will no longer be required. Instead, documentation must be uploaded with the submission displaying the site code number from the database. An example of what this could look like would be a screenshot of the site listing in the database. So those are the major updates for the Brownfield landfill adder. And with that, I'll pass it on to my colleague, Chris.
Thanks, Candace. So next slide. So my name is Christopher Rogers. I'm a project manager with New York Sun focusing on our low to moderate income incentives. So I'm going to start off with an overview of the changes to the single family residential low to moderate income incentives, and then go on to an overview of the eligibility rules and funding and how you can apply. So starting with an overview of the changes, the 10 kilowatt cap for what is called the affordable solar incentive has been removed. Additionally, the requirement that energy efficiency measures be installed has also been removed in order to qualify for the adder, for the incentive. And lastly, we are working on introducing a geographic-based eligibility that would pre-qualify applicants for this incentive, for this higher incentive, based on their location within identified census tracts. Next slide. So now moving on into the eligibility for the program, the affordable solar incentive is available for single-family residential households those are 1 to 4 family homes. In order to qualify for the incentive, you must be at 80% of the area median income or below, and you'll see a link to the income guidelines by the different regions across the state. And the way the incentive works are that if you qualify for the incentive within the Con Edison or Upstate region, you will receive, the project will receive an incentive of 80 cents per watt. That's the combined residential incentive and the affordable solar incentive. For projects that are in Long Island, where there currently are no residential incentives available, the affordable solar incentive is 40 cents a watt. Next slide. So how do you apply to this, to receive this incentive for those who are unaware? First, the customer must complete the affordable solar incentive eligibility application. That application is what will clarify or will confirm that they are at the 80% area median income. In addition, there is a residential savings calculator. You can see the link that will be there, and when the slides go out for this presentation, you'll be able to access that. The residential savings calculator is what we require all contractors applying for this incentive to establish that the customer is receiving a full cost savings for the full lifetime of the electric system. In addition, this will be confirming that if the system is going with a third-party ownership option via a lease or PPA, then if there's an escalator included, does not exceed 1.5% annually. Lastly, the New York Sun contractor will submit the affordable solar application as part of the standard New York Sun incentive application via the Salesforce portal, and you'll submit all of this documentation together. And so, next slide. So this is just a brief overview of what the incentive is in different regions of the state and how it works. As you can see in the top row, that's for Con Edison and Upstate region. It's 80 cents per watt reserved for single-family residential installations where the residents are at 80% of the area median income or below. Within the Long Island region, it's 40 cents a watt for that same category of households that are at 80% area median income. Next slide. And so now I'm going to transition into the low to moderate income incentive equivalent for multifamily housing. So I'll do a brief overview of the changes that have been made to the program, along with discussing eligibility and funding. I'm going to go into more detail on a significant change which offers a higher incentive for community solar, community distributed generation projects, and how you can apply. So briefly going through what the major changes are, the current cap of 50 kilowatts has been increased to 200 kilowatts. This means, similar to the lower cap, all project capacity for projects that are applying for the multifamily affordable housing adder above 200 kilowatts would receive the standard non-residential incentive within the Con Edison or Upstate region. This incentive is not available in the Long Island region. Another change for the incentive now is that it's fixed at $1 per watt statewide for eligible projects. That means that the applicable non-residential incentive plus the multifamily affordable housing adder will be $1 per watt. That means that the multifamily adder will be automatically adjusting as the standard non-residential incentive goes down to maintain a level of $1 per watt statewide. In addition, there is a new incentive of $1.15 a watt that applies for community distributed generation projects that are either owned by a public housing authority or a nonprofit organization where 100% of the offtake is going either to low to moderate income households or affordable housing, and there is a guaranteed 20% bill credit discount from the community solar project. I'm going to go into that in more detail in a later slide. Next slide. So to go through the eligibility and funding details, there is an eligibility criteria list which contains documentation that will establish that the project has been cited at regulated affordable housing. Typically, that comes in the form of a regulatory agreement from an oversight authority. Projects that are community distributed generation must submit documentation or they must meet additional criteria related to the allocation of credits to low to moderate income households. And in addition to that, projects that are seeking the higher $1.15 per watt incentive, there is an added level of criteria and documentation that you will need to submit to qualify for that for this incentive. This is the funding details. It's a big change in that we are locking this at $1 per watt statewide. That means it's a big jump in the Upstate region, which was a combined incentive of 75 cents a watt and is now locked at $1 per watt. It also means that as you see the non-residential blocks decline, we are locking it at $1 per watt combined with the non-residential and the multifamily affordable housing adder, and that is capped at the 200 kilowatt size. And the way that you will apply for that is when you, similar to other added incentives, when you submit your New York Sun incentive application via the Salesforce portal, you will select the multifamily affordable housing adder, and that will require you to upload additional documentation. Next slide. So I'd like to go into a little more detail on the higher $1.15 per watt for community solar projects that are cited on regulated affordable housing. Specifically the additional criteria that the contractors will be required to submit. So there are three areas there are three components that you will need to provide. First, you will need to provide documentation that establishes that it's owned by a public housing authority or a nonprofit organization. Second, there must be a demonstration that no less than 60% of the project capacity is going directly to low to moderate income households. The remainder of that capacity must go to either that affordable housing site or other affordable housing properties. This means that 100% of the capacity must go to either low to moderate income households or affordable housing properties, but specifically there must be documentation that shows that 60% of the capacity is going to LMI households. Additionally, you must submit documentation that the low to moderate income subscribers are receiving a 20% bill credit discount or the equivalent. I want to just try to restate that second bullet in a different way. What it really means is that if you are seeking this higher $1.15 per watt incentive, you must show that 100% of the capacity is going to an affordable housing property, but that can include capacity that is up to 40% that is going, for example, to a common area meter at that affordable housing property. But there must be documentation that individual LMI households are receiving at least 60% of that capacity. Next slide. All right, so I'd just like to run through what the process would be. What an interested applicant will have to do is you will have to select the multifamily affordable housing adder as part of the standard New York Sun application process. When you're submitting, when you're applying for this adder, you're also going to have to include the documentation that would be listed on the eligibility criteria list in the form of a regulatory agreement that established the property as regulated affordable housing. That would also include the documentation if it's a community solar project that is showing that it's going to be owned by either a public housing authority or a nonprofit organization. For those who are seeking the higher community solar adder, what we are going to require is documentation that shows when you're submitting this application that you have committed to allocating 100% of the capacity to affordable housing, and that your bill credit agreement will commit to, for the lifetime of the project, a 20% discount. That can come in the form of documentation of your subscription agreement that you're going forward with. We understand that at the time you are submitting a New York Sun incentive application, you likely will not have the project fully subscribed, and so you would not be able to submit the allocation agreement at that time to show that 100% of the capacity is going to affordable housing. But we would ask for documentation in the form of an attestation or something of similar strength that shows that you have committed this project to 100% affordable housing, and in addition to what your bill credit or your subscription agreements will be. Next slide. And this slide is intended to show essentially how the multifamily affordable housing adder would work, what the incentive levels will be. On the top row, you see what the incentives will be for any project that is cited on regulated affordable housing. It's, as you can see, it's $1 per watt with a cap of 200 kilowatts. Public housing authorities, nonprofit organizations, but also for-profit affordable housing are eligible for this incentive. The second row at the higher community solar project incentive level of $1.15 per watt, you can see the main difference in eligibility there is that for-profit affordable housing is not eligible for this incentive, and you would also have to provide that documentation regarding your subscription agreements that shows your commitment to a 20% bill credit, as well as the 100% dedicated capacity to regulated affordable housing. So that concludes. Next slide. That concludes that portion of the presentation, and now we're going to transition into Q&A. We're going to take a few minutes to consolidate the questions that have come in. For those who have questions about these changes, please enter those into the chat function, and we will try to get to as many as possible. All right, so I think we're going to get started on the Q&A section, and I'd like to clarify that the remainder of this webinar will be focused on Q&A. One quick reminder that, or I guess one quick question to get answers: how many units is multifamily? Multifamily includes all housing or non-residential projects above 1 to 4 family housing, or 1 to 4 family is residential, and above that, if it's residential, then it would be counted as multifamily. And I think we can get kicked off with the first question about PV plus storage upstate incentives or any consideration there. Luke, if you wanted to take that one.
Yeah, so happy to do so. We talked about implement or the existing Long Island residential PV plus storage program, and we're making some changes to that. At this time, we're not implementing a PV plus storage residential program in Con Ed or Upstate. The reason that we launched the Long Island program is that the Long Island utility, PSEG, has a dynamic load management program which offers price signals to households with storage and encourages them to operate the storage in a way that benefits the grid. We don't really have anything like that yet in Con Ed or in the Upstate utilities. So there's really no financial incentive to operate the storage in a way that benefits the grid. So we're going to hold off on that for now, but hopefully we're going to see some sort of dynamic load management or monetary time of day tariff come for the Upstate and Con Ed utilities sometime in the next few years. So we'll keep our eye on that.
Thanks, Luke. There's another question about the Green Jobs, Green New York loans. That was question number 4. If you want to just clarify that.
Hi, this is Heather Clark. I can take that question. The Green Jobs, Green New York legislation precludes us from going over the $25,000, but we are in discussions internally trying to team that up or pair it with a companion loan. We're still looking to get internal approvals to throw out the details, but stay tuned and we'll have some good news for you soon.
Thanks, Heather. There's a few questions that came in about the $1.15 per watt incentive, and I'm going to try to go through a couple of them here. One was just a clarification on the allocation capacity to households versus common area meters. In order to qualify for the multifamily affordable housing adder at that higher level for community solar projects, what you will be, the 100% allocated capacity means that it must go to an affordable housing property. The fact that 60% of the capacity must go to individual LMI households just means that sometimes there are meters, and part of the load of an affordable housing property is not directly related to the individual households, the low to moderate income renters at that building. And so if you are seeking this higher incentive, you would have to show that at least 60% is going to actual LMI households, with the remainder of the capacity could go to other load or other meters at the affordable housing property. Then another question about the 20% bill credit for this higher incentive. Is that a 20% bill credit on the solar credits, or a 20% discount on the household's entire bill? What we're looking for in order to qualify for that higher incentive would be the latter. We are looking for the subscription agreement to be providing, or to be guaranteeing the discount on their, or that would be part of the subscription agreement. Although Max, please feel free to clarify this is the solar credit, but additionally, there's a question, or is the LMI? Okay. There's a question about, is the LMI adder for Con Ed in addition to the CDG adder? I'd like to clarify that the higher multifamily affordable housing adder is for the Upstate and the Con Edison region. It is not, the only region that is not, that the multifamily affordable housing adder does not cover is Long Island. But this higher $1 per watt, as well as the $1.15 per watt, would include the entirety of Upstate and the Con Edison region. The affordable solar incentive that focuses on single-family residential projects, that is 80 cents a watt within Con Edison and Upstate, and 40 cents a watt within the Long Island service territory. I'd like to just answer, there's a few questions that have come in about the ownership of the system, or specifically the phrase owned by nonprofit or public housing authority. So the key issue is that the property must be owned by the public housing authority or a nonprofit organization. And so if this is a PPA, that would be fine. Similarly, if this is if that we're looking at, I guess, what would be the property owner, not the fact that it has been fully financed via the nonprofit or the housing authority.
And Chris, I'll add to that answer because I see we had a variation on the question, which I believe is in reference to, well, actually, I might be incorrect about that. So I'll decipher this question. Yes, that's correct, and we do, even if it's a nonprofit affordable housing owner, but the project is the property itself may be financed by low-income housing tax credits, so there may be sort of a complex ownership structure. For that purpose, we would consider that nonprofit ownership, if I understand this question correctly.
And just piggyback upon that, oh, Max, I think you're going to say what I was going to say, but I was going to confirm that HCFC co-ops would be considered nonprofits for the purpose of this adder, if that's what you were going to add in there. Another question is basically if you had a system that was above 200 kilowatts, could you site it on affordable housing and dedicate the remaining capacity to, or I guess could you qualify via the first 200 kilowatts and then allocate the rest to other subscribers? Would the entirety have to go to LMI housing? The entirety of the project has to be dedicated to LMI or to regulated affordable housing. You wouldn't be able to do a 300 kilowatt system, 200, do a higher discount credit, and then do the remaining 100 to market rate subscribers.
And while we sort through some of the questions coming through, Leslie, maybe you could address question 10. Leslie, you are unmuted if you are trying to speak. Okay, well, I can take a shot at it. There's a question about information related to field and photo inspections in the manual. That information is now found in the QA standards manual and reference guide. Those documents are found in the contractor resources dropdown. There's a lot of detailed information in there. And Leslie or Frank, please go ahead and add anything I've missed.
Yeah, that's correct. This is Frank. That's correct. The manual and the QA, well, the QA guide was updated and there was some slight differences. We went with the latest version, which was the QA version.
I'm going to run through a couple of quick answers. One, there are no planned changes to the adder for carports within Con Edison. Is still available. Second, bifacial solar panels can participate within any of New York Sun's offerings or the incentives. There's no distinction or prohibition on those. Additionally, there are no changes to the commercial block within Con Edison, which operates under the non-residential standard. The new EFS pro forma will be available on July 1st. And we're going to continue going through some of these questions. So another question on the distinction between the ownership of the, I guess, about the distinction between owned by public housing authority, nonprofit organization, specifically if there was a partnership between a private equity owner and an LMI community organization. I think we're focusing on the ownership of the property itself, but I think we'd need more information there without making a blanket statement as to whether or not that will qualify as owned by a nonprofit organization. I guess, what is the nature of that partnership? And so we would need more details on that situation in order to assess the availability of a higher $1.15 per watt adder. And to clarify that there will be an official announcement on the new EFS pro forma that we'll be making next week, June 24th. And I'd also like to clarify that the area median income is calculated by county. So we're seeing kind of a trickle of questions come in here. And so, please do use this time to I guess, to inquire about any of these proposed changes. We'll keep this open for, I guess, as long as it's needed, but it looks like we may be wrapping up. So there's a question about, I guess what qualifies as a 20% discount, and I think as a preface to that answer, I think what we would like to establish is that we're open to other models to establish that there is something the equivalent of a 20% bill credit savings. But one of the key considerations is that we are looking for clear documentation that there is savings that is going to LMI households that are seeking this adder. And so this may require a follow-up after this webinar to discuss what an alternative model would be to providing the subscription agreement that's showing a 20% savings on the customer's electricity account.
It doesn't look like we're getting any additional questions. Chris, are we seeing any more coming in?
No, it doesn't look like it. And so I guess I wanted to, thank you to everyone who jumped in on this webinar, especially those who are also part of the CNI webinar. Appreciate your participation and particularly the representatives from the industry trade groups. I would encourage everyone to reach out to us to continue to provide feedback on our programs, which we're always interested in growing and improving. Max, I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
No, I'll just share my thanks to everybody. Have a great afternoon.
All right, everyone. Take care.